The shocking excess of the fertility industry are becoming more and more clear. Uncritically accepting reproductive technologies is no longer an option, especially for Christians. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. This is Breakpoint. I am unapologetically Protestant, but as I've said for quite a while now, our Catholic friends have long led the way on many bioethical issues like abortion and assisted reproductive technologies. For example, back in 2008, the Vatican released a document called Dignitatis personae, which said that the desire for a child, while good, cannot justify the production of offspring, just as the desire to have a child cannot justify the abandonment or destruction of a child once he or she has been conceived. Now look, I recognize that Christians disagree about whether it's intrinsically wrong to conceive children outside of the sexual union of husband and wife, including through in vitro fertilization. Because God ordered the pleasure and intimacy of married sex toward procreation, I find the Catholic ethical teaching against IVF to be pretty compelling. But still, like I said, not all Christians agree. For example, several months ago, I had a robust discussion on this issue on the Breakpoint podcast with my good friend Dr. David Stevens. David has long led the Christian Medical and Dental Society and has been one of the great medical missionaries of our lifetime. What David and I did agree on, and what everyone can agree on, especially Christians, is that any fertility process that knowingly destroys or abandons human lives, including embryos, is immoral. And that's what the debate over IVF must confront right now. Recently, NBC reported that frozen and abandoned embryos in U.S. fertility clinics may now number in the millions. Because of how IVF has been done for so long, we are facing a human rights crisis. Namely, what should we do with these little abandoned lives? Throughout much of the history of the practice, in vitro fertilization has involved creating more embryos than any couple could ever bring to term. Standard practice included retrieving scores of eggs per cycle from women and then fertilizing all of them. A few of the resulting embryos are transferred at a time to the gestational mother. Some may not implant. Some others might even be intentionally killed in reductive abortions. In other words, all too often, this process involved destruction in the name of reproduction, justified somehow because of efficiency. Now, what happened to all of the embryos not transferred? Well, these human individuals were suspended in the earliest stage of their development within tanks of supercooled nitrogen. With modern techniques, they could survive this way for a long time, but for many of their parents, life moved on while storage fees added up. Once they have the children that they wanted, the embryos are abandoned to either sit indefinitely in the freezer or to die. At one fertility clinic in Florida, for example, a third of stored embryos faced this fate. Because the CDC doesn't require clinics to report the number of abandoned embryos, we have good reason to believe that this is similar at clinics all across the country. Now let's be clear, by every scientific standard, embryos are living, genetically distinct human individuals that just need the right environment, nourishment, and time to develop. Given the scale of this overwhelming human rights crisis, the near silence about IVF in evangelical churches is simply inexcusable. How many pastors ever address this issue from the pulpit or ever approach it in premarital counseling? How many uninformed Christian couples, in their laudable desire to have children, are using methods to create life that also destroys life? Now, to be clear, there are clinics that use IVF methods that only involve fertilizing and implanting one embryo at a time. This type of IVF doesn't result in excess embryos and so doesn't destroy life. But how many Christian couples even understand the difference in these procedures? Protestant pastors, this is a softball. It's objectively wrong to bring human beings into existence knowing they'll languish in a freezer or be discarded. In many cases, these embryos can be adopted. Google the Snowflakes Adoption Program to learn more. Christians will have different answers to questions about the ethics of IVF, but in order to answer these questions, we first have to ask them. If we really believe all human life is sacred, the technology behind this excess cannot remain a taboo subject, especially for the church. For Breakpoint, I'm John Stonestreet.